Hey guys, Max 92 and welcome back to another tryout. Today's tryout is on
JoJo's Kimyō na Bōken All-Star Battle R.
Like last week's video, potential spoilers for the entirety of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. If you haven't read or watched all of it, any of it, there might be spoilers here, mostly just characters existing in this video, but just in case, watch out. So since last week's video on Eyes of Heaven, I've now gotten over 70 chapters into JoJolion, so I'm most of the way done with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure at this point, so I don't have to worry about any spoilers. But I saw this game in its marketing while I was getting into JoJo, and I'm like, okay, cool, a JoJo game is coming out. And unlike Eyes of Heaven, this one is a more traditional fighting game, you know. It's more in sort of like the Tekken area of fighting games where you're sort of in a 3D arena and you can move back and forth in like this little environment, but it is more traditional style fighting game. This game is a remake of a 2013 PlayStation 3 game, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle, but this version, I don't know whether to call it a remake or a remaster. It's more of a remake, I think, because it adds new mechanics, it changes art assets here and there, models, and it also adds like 10 new characters with 4 more characters coming via DLC, and then also another character coming as like a free update. I think right now there are 51 characters, and by the time all that DLC is done, there will be like 56 characters or something in the game. A lot of characters, and I don't know exactly how many there were in the original All-Star Battle, but it seems like there are significantly more, and this roster is more akin to the size of Eyes of Heaven. Initially, when I was playing it, I downloaded it this is pretty much as soon as I could, because I pre-ordered it like a couple days before, and I was having a good time. You know, I was getting a little frustrated here and there with trying to figure out what was going on, so I was just playing in the All-Star Battle mode, trying to figure out what I was doing wrong, why I was getting comboed into oblivion by the AI, and the PlayStation 5 ate a 45-minute recording because the game froze in the middle of a match, and the music was playing, but I couldn't interact with the game, so I was like, okay, I gotta close the game. So I closed the game, recording gone, 45 minutes of recording disappeared. So a lot of my opening recording just doesn't exist. So that was cool. I was really, really frustrated by that. And due to already being a little bit frustrated trying to figure out the game and having that happen, I started like mega tilting, and I did like 10 ranked matches, and it was also like 3 in the morning. So like I was having a pretty like poor time for a bit because the online is not rollback netcode, and I don't know much about internet architecture, but I know that rollback netcode is good for fighting games for whatever reason. This game doesn't have it, so it's a detriment to the online. I don't know how much of a detriment, but it's a detriment to the online. But I was mega tilting because these people were just like infinite comboing me, and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know how I'm supposed to get out of this. And part of my issues is because I felt like I couldn't control the game very well, and that was partially because I was tilting, but it was also because when I stopped tilting and I left the game gun and I came back the next day, I was still having some of the problems, and I think those problems stem from playing with the D-pad on the DualSense. Now, the PlayStation has always had this segmented D-pad as far back as I remember. You know, here it is on the PlayStation 4 controller, you know, it's on the PlayStation 3 controller, it's on the PlayStation 2 controller. I don't think this is a great D-pad for the traditional style of fighting game that was designed with a joystick in mind. Games that are designed with this sort of control system in mind, games like Tekken, I think play fine on PlayStation, but doing quarter circles and stuff with this segmented D-pad, you're missing bits, so you can't really tell if you're hitting the stuff correctly or in the right order. It gets a bit sloppy, and I'm sure plenty of people can compensate for that. I just don't play most of my fighting games on PlayStation. I play my fighting games mostly on my Xbox. And so, the Xbox hasn't had a great, track record. The original Xbox, the Xbox 360, this is an okay D-pad. It's small. It's pretty small, and it's not as precise as you want. I don't even have the Xbox One controller in here. It's bad. It's a tiny D-pad. It's terrible. The Series X refresh controller has this this is better. It's still a bit small, and that's one of the things that the DualSense and the PlayStation controllers have. They have a big D-pad. Those work fine. I have this third-party PlayStation 3 controller, which is designed like an Xbox controller. It has this D-pad. This is about what the size of the D-pad on the regular Xbox One controller, but it's up. It's not as recessed into the controller as the original Xbox One controller, so this is better. But I think for fighting games, something like the Genesis controller D-pad with all of the directions is really good, especially at this size. You get a lot of good control. And the same situation with this other weird third-party controller I have. This D-pad is weird, but I think it's better than having the segmented thing. And also, I really like this little controller that I've bought for playing little platformers and stuff. The D-pad on this is pretty good and stuff like that. The D-pad on the Joy-Cons are bad. Probably don't play fighting games on the Switch unless you opt to get one of these with a regular D-pad on it. This D-pad's alright. Again, a little small, but it's fine for, if you need a D-pad on the Switch. I think the issue that I was having is that I just can't get this D-pad to perform the way I want it to. And I would really like to get a PlayStation controller with a D-pad like this, like the Genesis controller does. Because, again, I think this is like a perfect D-pad for fighting games because of the directions, especially fighting games that do things like quarter circles or those sorts of moves that a lot of like the Street Fighter descended types of fighting games have. That was a bit of a tangent about D-pads. So we're going to move on. Speaking of the online here, the online actually has this really cool like event system thing where it's really just like each week it looks like there's a set of online missions, and if you complete those missions you unlock a cosmetic for the characters. These cosmetics are not locked behind the online missions. Once that week is over, and I'm assuming once every week has been gone through, it loops every 12 weeks it says. Once that week is over, those cosmetics go into the in-game shop, which, don't be afraid, it's not that kind of in-game shop. This is sort of like the more traditional, like old school style of in-game shops where you earn currency playing the game, and then you use that to acquire rewards and stuff. You change the colors of your characters, change their voice lines, their whatever. I think it's a cool system to incentivize people to at least play or try out the online modes to keep them somewhat populated. Hopefully the game gets rollback netcode or whatever it needs to have a good, online situation, because I don't know if it's a me problem, I don't know if it's a game problem. I won 2 of the 10 matches that I played online. So don't know what that's about, the 10 ranked matches anyway. I don't think I'm that bad at fighting games. I'm not great, but I understand the basics enough to compete somewhat. So it's just sort of I think I would have won a couple more matches out of the 10 had I not been struggling to get moves to happen, because there were just many situations where I was like, okay, quarter circle button, and I was just doing the basic attack instead. So I was just sitting here going like this, and it's like, okay, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to perform a specific action, and it just wouldn't happen. And that happened through a lot of my playtime. But again, I think that is more of a PlayStation D-pad issue that I'm having than the game itself as a problem. Now, for my little bit of research into the original Arcelor Battle, because I don't have it, I'm not going to buy it, and despite there being a PS3 back there, I'm not going to hook that up to play anything. So I did a little bit of research into the original game to figure out what's different. And it seems like the original game had a story mode that was basically just fights from the series, and then they were text narration, cutscene things to sort of weave them together. This story mode in All-Star Battle R has been replaced with All-Star Battle Mode, I believe is what it's called. And this is just the same concept, but rather than it being, running you through the whole thing, you've got different pages based on the different parts, and each page has like a couple of fights. Some of them are like fights that happened in the series, and they have special dialogue that is from the series. And some of them are sort of like extra fights, I think they're what they're called, where they're sort of like non-canon fights that are just interesting to pair people together. And then, if you complete enough of the things on the page, you unlock the boss fight for the page, which is, again, generally a fight from the part. The only exception, I think, is the Part 8 page, which, with Josuke being the only Part 8 character, means, nope, you can't really depict any of the fights from the part because there's no other characters to put him against. I think that this All-Star Battle Mode is cool, and even if they had just kept the original story mode, that would have been cool. They're not quite as cool as the original story that Eyes of Heaven got, which is very interesting, especially with the involvement at whatever level of Araki, the original author. That makes the Eyes of Heaven story a lot more compelling for me to want to play through. I'm not as interested in playing through All-Star Battle Mode, despite other than unlocking the stuff that is specifically only unlockable within All-Star Battle Mode. But otherwise, I think it's a fine mode. It's a way to get people to learn the game a little bit and play around and stuff like that. I think the story mode in fighting games generally is a way to sort of lead people into learning the mechanics. And there's also just traditional arcade ladders you can do as well. So I think it's got a pretty good single-player offering here, but it's not quite as compelling a single-player offering as Eyes of Heaven. So if you're coming into this and you want to play by yourself, it might not be as interesting to play by yourself as it would be to play Eyes of Heaven by yourself. But those are they're two very different types of games. The biggest problem here being that, again, I don't know that much about it, but supposedly the way that the online is set up is very not good for fighting games, so that's probably going to weigh in people's decision onto whether or not they buy it. So I got two more points here on my list here, and the first one is the menus are leagues better than what was in Eyes of Heaven. There's so much snappier. You can actually see what you're doing when you're customizing characters a lot better. It's just better. It's just overall better. I think it's kind of weird that the medals page is linked in so many different places. I feel like you could just put one of those on the thing. I don't know. But it's a lot better of a menu than in Eyes of Heaven, and I don't know what that menus really look like in the original game, so maybe they're just what the original game's menus look like. But man, they're so much better than Eyes of Heaven. My last point here, though, is the price. I think it's a bit too expensive. I didn't have the biggest issue spending $70 for the deluxe edition, but I do think it's a bit expensive. At $50 for the standard and $70 for the deluxe. That's a lot of money. I get games are sort of going up in price, sometimes they're not, but this feels more... I think it would feel better at a $40-$60 price point than a $50-$70 price point. But Bandai is going to charge what they're going to charge, That's just sort of what Bandai does. So they're a company, and sometimes they release really cool stuff. I've bought a lot of Bandai stuff lately. Sometimes it's not as polished. It's just they have access to a lot of IP, and So they make a lot of tie-in games, essentially. For every game that's well-polished and faithful to the original art style and made as such a labor of love by obvious fans, like things like Eyes of Heaven and All-Star Battle are, there is a jump force that looks bad and is not fun to play, you know? So, Bandai is a bit hit or miss, and this, in some sense, feels like a bit of a cash grab in how high it's priced, but at the same time, there's so much polish and care that is obviously visible in these games through the interactions between the characters and, you know, the different costumes and the references and all that stuff, that, like, I can't be upset that the game exists. I can be a little annoyed that it's priced as high as it is. So, like, that's where I kind of stand on the price. It's just a little too high of a price. And that's sort of something I felt a need to bring up, because, again, I think $50 is a bit too expensive for a PS3 game, essentially. You know, it is an updated, better version of this PS3 game, but it still isn't that different, especially visually, from the original game on PS3. That's where I sort of stand on it. I've been rambling for a while. This is a bit longer. I had a whole tangent about D-pads, so I think that's pretty much covered what I had to say and on my notes here. So my takeaway, my final decision is I think that this game passes its tryout. Again, there's some like iffy things here and there, but like I played it a lot all over the weekend, and I've had a lot of fun with it. I think it is fun, especially as someone who has been really getting into this franchise and learning about characters and learning their stories, to see those characters and stories be so faithfully represented on any sort of adapted media, because it's not always a given. And so I think this passes its tryout, especially as a fan, and I don't even think this is a bad game to jump into if you're just starting, just learning, or not even, you know, you haven't really gotten into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I think this game is a decent place to sort of like jump in, learn some characters, and then go on and start your bizarre adventure. Because, like, while I did mention some spoilers, it's not big spoilers. It's just sort of like, these characters exist, and some of that, you know, can be spoilers in this series. But anyway, I've been going on for too long, so we're going to get down here to the end bits. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you dislike this video, hit the dislike button. If you go down in the description, you find links to all sorts of places. I got a Twitter, a Patreon, a Bandcamp, Redbubble, etc. Go down there, click links, do what you do there. Subscribe if you want to keep with us in other shows. Leave a comment. If you played the original All-Star Battle, if you played All-Star Battle R, Eyes of Heaven, have you played any older JoJo games? Have you read any of the series, watched any series? Just leave a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are on any of this. Share the video, do the things. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!